So let's move on to the formal action items then. The first, you're going to do an overview, I'm sorry, first, of CSO decommissioning. I'm sorry.
I just thought I'd just give the board a real quick overview of some of the reasons for it and what it's all about, not the technical aspects of the decommissioning, just to clear up and have some clarification on what it's about. So, as you know, the decommissioning plan for the Mauna Kea observatories was approved by the Board of Land and Natural Resources in 2010. And so this becomes the state's plan for how we deconstruct and restore sites on Mauna Kea that was once occupied by an observatory facility. The Board of Regents also approved this plan, and so their approval means it's a commitment to the process that's described in the decommissioning process. And so the decommissioning plan is really more not just about taking a structure down. It's a process. And so the decommissioning plan defines this process. That you're taking down something and you're restoring something. But deconstruction can be full or partial, and the restoration of site is based on this three-tiered approach that's described in the comprehensive management plan. It can be minimal, where basically after you remove the infrastructure, you just grade it to surface. You just grade the surface. A moderate restoration would be to restore the site such that it's habitable for arthropods, and full restoration is restoring the site to as its original condition as possible. So the review process described in the decommissioning plan, the starting point is full removal and full restoration, and that would be the ideal situation. However, it has to go through a process where you need to look at all the compliance documents. For example, the CDUA, the CDUP, the master lease, sublease, and any operating agreements that are associated with the particular observatory, in this case CSO. Because some of these documents may have conditions that are related to the decommissioning of a facility. So all of these need to be reviewed for us, for the university or the project to be compliant with all of their permitting that's associated with the project. Then the part of the process is this environmental due diligence. And important in that, of course, is an environmental assessment. In the case of CSO, it's going through an environmental, the Chapter 343 EA process. And this process, as you know, an EA is a disclosure document. So what it needs to do is disclose all of the impacts that are associated with the taking down of a facility and the alternatives that are described in the assessment. And this is to provide the community with information so that they can give us feedback as to what degree you would decommission, you would remove the structure, and to what degree you would restore the site. So the idea is that providing the community with all of this information, they would give us feedback. And in keeping with the 2000 Mauna Kea Science Reserve Master Plan, it's all about community-based management and community input. So it's important when we go through this decommissioning process that the community has a role in telling us to what degree they want the facility to remove, whether it's everything above and below ground, as well as to what degree they want the site restored. So that's a key part of this process, the community participation and input. Another part, the way the community participate, is through this decommissioning review committee, and that's comprised of volunteers with more technical expertise. So as we discuss the removal of infrastructure, for example, we would have engineers that would help us to evaluate what that means and how that should be done. We have planners and landscape architects who help us with the site removal and having to evaluate some of the processes and activities that would be involved in the site improvement. And of course, the major part is doing outreach to the public, whether it's through public hearings, public open houses, giving the public an opportunity to give us their particular input into how we go forward with the decommissioning. So that's pretty much, I just wanted to provide that clarification. It's a technical process, but I didn't want to go through all the technical aspects of it. Some of it has already come to you. The notice of intent was already provided to the Mauna Kea Management Board a while back. So we're going through the environmental assessment phase. That will go through a draft, will be presented to Kahuku Mauna, and then it'll come to the Mauna Kea Management Board for its review and approval to move on to the next stages. This bridge is the drafting of the final.
You know, in the early days when the environmental committee, when we were reviewing the original obsolescence plan, I always had an issue with regards to let's start here, but then we hit the compliance issues. So this is going to take some work again to make sure that once we are going to start at full restoration, because that's one of the original intents of the CMP, if I recall, was the what was discussed in the environmental committee quite some time ago. And Deb, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but starting there, definitely. I'd hate to start there and we wind up back where nowhere near what we should be looking at when it comes to the obsolescence plan. And yes, I know that we have to go through the EA. Unfortunately, with the technical aspects regarding a number of the compliance issues has always been problematic no matter what kind of project that we're doing. So this is going to be probably a difficult conversation, but I'm glad we're starting it with regards to at least beginning the decommission process of this particular observatory. So that's just my statement regarding the this plan. Okay, thanks.
Real quick, remind me where we stand with decommissioning Hokukea right now.
So, as you know, Hokukea brought forth their notice of intent to decommissioning a few years ago, and there was quite a lot of public comments about whether or not about not decommissioning this educational telescope. And so the University of Hawaii Hilo was asked to go out and consult with the community on this. And in the meantime, the UH Hilo Astronomy Department was looking at other sites for Hokukea. And their research has indicated that the only place they can do it is really on Mauna Kea. Mauna Loa is not, it's not a site they can use for various reasons. An area on Hualalai is not usable. It's too low and it has too much moisture, so it could damage the telescope. They know that the summit is probably off limits, so we're looking at Halepohaku as a location. And so their initial conversations with the group that came forward against the decommissioning of Hokukea seems to be okay with Halepohaku. So we need to we're trying to look at Halepohaku as a potential site for Hokukea.
So when would we expect a notice from them to come back to the board?
So I think once they think they've decided on what they want to do, they can come back with it. But just as a reminder that the telescope in the Hokukea site on the summit has been removed. It's just the removing of the shell.
Yes, I think the transparency with regard to the costs of decommissioning will be important. And as I understand it, the University of California is funding that at this point. But I think that if we can have a policy of keeping that cost transparent so that we can see what it costs to decommission, because this is the first one that's been done in a really long time, if ever. Bob McLaren couldn't cite another one during the contested case. We have a lot of evidence of abandoned telescopes all over the country. So I think that it's important that we begin to understand what it does cost to decommission. And the number of trucks, the number of, the kinds of environmental degradation that happens during decommissioning is going to be really interesting to see too. And I think it's important just to keep that in mind.
The environmental impacts of the process itself will be covered in the EA, I would assume. But to your point on the financial component, obviously there's a requirement that, in this case, Caltech cover those costs. But I don't think, Steph, we've ever talked about necessarily making those numbers or that information public information. We don't have that in the, okay. But the request is there, we hear that. Thank you. Any other questions?